When creating artwork, sometimes limitations can set us back. At least that's how you would think if you were thinking negatively. But for me, I think sometimes limitations can help you grow and learn a tremendous amount. Hello and welcome. My name is Charlambos. I go by Bob. I'm not your typical painter. And today, I figured it's a good idea to talk about limitations and how the experience of having them can actually make you learn quite a bit. And what do I mean by that? Well, I'll tell you in a moment. But first I'm going to talk about my trip to Greece in the spring, because I experienced limitations while there. I wrapped up my cat painting recently, and I began work actually on a new landscape. And it's going to be a small painting like the two others before it. And the reason why I have been doing small paintings, if I had a large scale canvas that was a lot bigger than what I'm currently working on, I would have had lots of room to do a lot of detail. But since I'm limiting myself to this tiny canvas, it's forcing me to get creative and cram as much detail as possible into a smaller area. And not only that, get creative with patterns and techniques to give an illusion of grass or trees in the background. And in ways, I'm thinking of it as a warm-up to a much bigger painting. But here, I'm in the comfort of my studio. I have lots of colors to pick from, lots of brushes, and I even have a monitor behind me that I could zoom in and get really nice detail if I really want close-ups. But when I was there, I didn't have these luxuries. I had less colors, and I had smaller paintings to work with. And coupled with very little time, it forced me to paint in a more impressionistic style, and in ways I got to experiment on pattern and repetition. This is a painting I did while I was in Greece, and this was actually the largest I went while there. This is also 11 by 14, and it's on very thin canvas board. I didn't have a lot of colors at my disposal to make this, and I had to rely heavily on different variations of greens and different layers of blues. And this here is my lemon tree painting, which actually was an indoor lemon tree that my father had in his house. If you look very carefully, one color that it's actually quite lacking is white, and there's a reason for that. And lastly, I have one of my personal favorites, Rula the cat, and it's an interesting story with her. I believe she actually liked to pose, so every time I approached her place, she would actually stand on that tree stump and give off a little pose. But the importance of this one, for me at least, is that this tree trunk is what led me to my current painting that I'm working on. Because while doing this, I was very limited with white. I didn't have a lot of white, and I had a month of time while there. So it forced me to be very conservative with the application of white. But in the process, I gained an appreciation for trying to do wood texture, which was a tree trunk that was cut. And here I am now. There are several different kinds of limitations an artist could have. One could be money, one could be time, one could be materials, and others could be things such as size and even location. When I was at my village, I didn't have a lot of time. I knew I had less than 30 days to do some work, and most of my time was devoted to photography. So I took a lot of long walks in the countryside, taking lots of photos and trying to go other locations as well. But time wasn't my only enemy. I had weather too. Unfortunately, and also fortunately for me, it was raining quite often. And because of the bad weather, I was able to capture some amazing cloud reference photos for possibly a future painting or two. I was forced to do a lot of paintings inside, and that's how I did Rula the cat and Charlie the dog. I used photos from my camera and my tablet to display them as I painted. A lot smaller than the big monitor, Anyhow, that's not the only limitation I had. Another one was actually color. Before I left, I was trying to think of if I needed to buy any more acrylic paints because I left some behind from the previous trip I had. One color that came to mind was white, and I was thinking very hard, and in the end, I thought I was okay, but boy was I wrong. When I saw my tube when I arrived, I noticed half of it was gone. And because of that, I was forced to try to think of alternative ways to paint, and it forced me to even pick different kinds of photos to use as well. The lemon tree painting was actually my first, and it was actually observational. I finished it in my studio with a couple of lemons and pieces of leaves as reference to do in a still life kind of manner, but it was all observational. And just by looking at it, you could tell I was very frustrated. Oddly enough, a lot of people say to use acrylic paint first before going into oils, but I actually started with oils first, so whenever I use acrylics, it's kind of life-changing for me. And there's actually only 3 times when I actually used acrylics in my entire life. Once it was for a few class assignments at MICA. The second was in 2019 during my winter trip in Greece, and the third was actually very recent in spring 2022. There's actually something exciting, the idea of fast-paced action. I'm a very slow painter, and acrylic dries very quickly. So that's not a good recipe for me as an artist who depends on paints to stay wet for a long time. There are various things I try to do to keep the paint wet longer, but ultimately I had to think fast and move fast. When you do things that are different and outside your comfort zone, you'd be surprised how your brain rewires to think differently and learn new techniques. I want to say that the way I do grass today in paintings results from my experience I had in 2019 doing grass in this painting Vatolakkos fields. I had an older camera then, and I couldn't project my image that I shot on a computer, so the best I could do is go to a photo shop and print out a copy, and I used a very tiny photo in order to do that painting. So there was a lot of lack of detail, but I tried to force myself to use it to the best of my ability, particularly in the grass. Lastly, the thing I wanted to talk about is observational painting, and that is something I am not used to doing either, or at least I haven't done it for a very long time. The last painting I did that was actually 100% observational was a Star Wars painting, and I set up a still life to do it, and that was quite a few years ago. Anyhow, the weather really stunk. It was very windy and cold, and going outdoors was kind of out of the question. So I did paintings indoor, but in springtime, minus the rain, days were okay. In winter 2019, I only did 3 paintings. But in spring 2022, I did actually 8 paintings, which is quite an achievement for myself because I am a slow painter after all. 5 were observational, but of those 5, only 3 were actually 100% observational. 2 of them, I used photos to finish them. One was Vatolakkos Fields 3. The sky kept moving, and so did the clouds. So I used a photo to finish it. But I did have 2 sessions, 1 week in between, where I went into the fields and started to paint. There's something different when you're actually painting outdoors and actually seeing what you're depicting right in front of you. It's a whole different game. And like acrylic paint, you have to work very fast because you have the sun and clouds constantly changing how the area looks. On one moment you have a shadow that's right below, say, a tree, and next thing you know it's to the right. And that's because the direction of lighting is changing, and also the temperature too. As the sun sets, colors become more warmer in orange and red. That's why when I went for my second session, I tried going back around the same time to paint during the same hours. As for the other painting, A Dream, it started as an observational painting, but it ended up being finished with photos, and that was not the intention. It rained. I went over there and I planned on going there at least 2 more times, and I had to lug supplies and water was probably the heaviest thing because there was no source near there. I even left 2 bottles that were not used up there. I'm pretty sure if someone searched the area, they will find where I hid them. But to make a long story short, I had the intent of finishing it there. In some ways, weather was a limitation, and because of that, it forced me to finish the painting with a photo. And I'm glad I thought about all the other rainy days, and I took some right before I left. And to close out this video, I will say there was one particular person that apparently all she could afford was construction paper of different colors, and that limitation actually helped her become very super successful. If you could guess who I'm talking about, leave it in the comments. She ended up using the construction paper to create patterns and pretty cool effects with them in almost a psychedelic appearance, and her artwork is pretty trippy. But it was that limitation that inspired her to experiment with the construction paper. If you made it to the end, thanks for watching. To be honest, I felt like this was an awkward video to do, but I thought it'd be interesting to talk how being limited can help you find different ways to become more creative. Once again, my name is Charles Lembos. I go by Bob. I am not your typical painter. Also, for more of my work, check out my Instagram, Not Your Typical Painter. Thanks again, and bye.